Hello, everybody. This is Patrick Bergin speaking. Thank you so much for joining me today for another webinar. I'm really enjoying these webinars. I hope you are. This is a great chance for me to get to speak to a number of you who are generous and loyal donors to us and just tell you a little bit more about one aspect of our work or one of the issues that we're facing in the field in Africa. So I enjoy doing these. For those of you who are joining for the first time, the way we proceed here is I'm going to talk about the subject for 20 minutes or so. And then you have a dialog box on your screen. If you have a question that you would like to ask at any time in the presentation, you can type in a question. And then at the end, I will try to respond to some of those questions. And if there are questions that I cannot get to, someone from AWF will get back to you with more information and an answer to your question. Let me also just say sort of before we jump in that we're coming up on the close of our financial year, which is June 30th. Thank you so much to all of you who have contributed. If you've not contributed yet, or if you're thinking about an additional gift, this would be a great time to remember AWF, keep us at the top of your giving priorities, and make sure that we finish this year on a strong financial footing. So the topic for today's discussion is conservation enterprise and AWF's use of conservation enterprise as a strategy to achieve our mission around Africa. I want to say that we have a strong history in conservation enterprise. For I'd say the last 15 years or so, AWF has been practicing conservation enterprise. Another way to talk about this is just to say that we have a small department that I think of as the MBA department. We have a few MBAs on staff, and AWF has looked carefully at enterprise. And of course, we don't do enterprise work just for the sake of enterprise. We define conservation enterprise as a commercial activity structured to achieve a conservation outcome. So we're always looking at, what is the conservation outcome of the proposed activity. Every enterprise that we invest in has what we call a conservation logic. There is a particular conservation issue that we're trying to solve or a particular threat that we're trying to abate. And that's why we've been involved in this sort of work. Let me say and admit up front, conservation enterprise work is hard. It's difficult. You all know this. Starting a business anywhere in the world is difficult. Starting a business in Africa might be even more challenging. Starting a business in a rural part of Africa where there's no infrastructure is additionally challenging. So I don't want to make this sound easy. We've struggled with it. We've learned some hard lessons. We know many other organizations have tried to do this work. Some of them have walked away from it because it's so difficult. We have not walked away from it, frankly, because I think we do not have that option. The governments and the people that we work with in Africa, for most of them, economic growth is their highest single objective. And it's very important that we be able to show a linkage between conservation and economic success. So just to give you a little bit of a perspective on AWF's conservation enterprise work over the last couple of years, we started out small. I sometimes call this the baskets and bangles stage. We started out with, enterprise handicrafts. This is a picture of a Maasai women's cooperative in northern Tanzania. These ladies were selling their beautiful beadwork and art along the side of the road, getting covered with dust every time a car went by. I sometimes think of this as being kind of quite small, quite petty enterprise, but in fact it's very significant. I've been in this shop and when tour groups have come through and, $1,000 have been spent in a single morning. And you might know that research has shown that particularly when money goes into the pockets of women, that money gets used to improve the nutrition of children, to pay school fees for things that the family needs and the household needs. Unfortunately, sometimes when the money goes to the men, it gets used on travel and beer and to buy more cattle. And so this sort of enterprise has been very significant. And there are community groups like this in a number of parts of Africa that AWF has helped through this level of enterprise. Well, we sort of wanted to move on from that, and in a lot of cases, going back to my point about conservation logic, we are asking communities to set aside significant pieces of land, fairly large pieces of land and habitat that could be used for things like agriculture or grazing. And in these cases, the opportunity cost of not engaging those other commercial activities is high. And so we've realized that we had to have enterprises that could compete, that could have a similar level of return. This is the Sabino Silverback Lodge in Rwanda, an AWF enterprise you may have read about, or some of you maybe even stayed there. We're very proud of it. It has generated very significant returns to this community, and of course this is the best place to stay in Rwanda if you're going to see mountain gorillas. Now, if you look at the two examples that I've just given, you might think, well, why don't you call this tourism enterprise, because it seems like it's all sort of tied to tourism. Well, not necessarily. Much of it is, but there are other businesses that are not necessarily directly tourism related. And just to give you an example, on the north bank of the Zambezi River in Zambia, AWF has helped the community set up a very extensive aquaculture project or fish farming project. This project also has a strong conservation logic. We are using an indigenous, actually two indigenous species of tilapia for fish farming. This is improving nutrition in the area. It's an alternative source of income. But we also have a hatchery, and we are releasing fish eggs back into the river to raise the populations of indigenous species of fish back into the river. So, so tourism is not the only enterprise we have done. Over the last, say, 15 years, AWF has helped conceptualize and develop at least 60 enterprises around the continent, and our latest records show that these enterprises are putting more than $2 million per year into the pockets of communities living around the heartlands and living around the places where AWF works and where we have wildlife. And I think we feel very proud of this. $2 million goes a long way in Africa. This is a lot of families and a lot of individuals whose lives have been touched by these businesses that are going on in Africa. Now, just to say a word again about the sectors that we're in, of the businesses that we've established, about 65% of them are tourism related, 35% of them related to agriculture sort of writ large. And one of the things I like to explain to people is that many of the communities that we work with are land rich but cash poor. They have land, that's their primary asset. And so with these enterprises, we are looking for a way to sort of capitalize that land, put it into productive use. And these are the two primary sectors that in rural Africa and wildlife parts of Africa we have found to be relevant. In all of these enterprises, there's two things that we want to see happening. First of all, of course, it's an enterprise. It has to be commercially successful. It has to succeed as a business. It puts income into the pockets of communities, employees, dividends that are paid out, and so forth. And then secondly, it must help achieve the conservation objectives. And so, for example, we've had conservation enterprises predicated on keeping a wildlife corridor open between Tarangire and Manyara National Parks in Tanzania. We've had conservation enterprises predicated on protecting habitat for the mountain gorilla in Rwanda and Uganda, and so forth. So that's a little bit of background, really, on AWF's fairly extensive engagement with conservation enterprise over the last 15 years. And what I'd like to do now is pivot a little bit and talk to you about the emergence of socially responsible investing and a whole movement sort of around socially responsible investing. This is really not a new concept. Even if you go back to the early days of this country and this continent, for example, if you take certain communities like the Quakers, there was the thought that it was very important to invest in businesses that did no harm, that did not take unfair advantage of employees or did not destroy the environment, and people wanted to make sure to do businesses that would actually benefit community and that were sort of godly investments that brought honor and respect to the people who invested in them. So I think this goes back deeply into the roots and ethics of the business community, even here in our country. Another sort of phase in the socially responsible investing is the whole concept of divestment, and I'm sure you remember the whole divestment movement around South Africa during the years of apartheid between 1960 and 1990. A real movement to encourage companies to withhold capital from companies that were misbehaving or companies that were in those days cooperating with the racist apartheid government of South Africa. So, you know, it occurred to me you can vote at the ballot box, you can vote with your feet, you vote checkout lane in what you purchase. But this whole idea that if you have capital to invest, you can also vote, you can also affect social change based on where you decide to deploy that capital, in companies that do good or in companies that do not do good. And really, this is sort of an alternative to just government regulation. You could say, well, you know, it's government's job to control bad companies, but sometimes that doesn't work. And so people who have capital, deploying that capital responsibly, this is another check and balance in society, you might say. Now, since those days, the socially responsible investing movement has continued to grow. A very common example that I bet many of you have heard about is the Grameen Bank and the whole microfinance movement. I'm sure all of you have read, you know, articles in The Economist and other places about this whole idea of providing small loans to individual households, small entrepreneurs to buy a sewing machine or a motorcycle and so forth and to start a business. And this movement has really continued to grow. And it's quite diverse. There is a big conference in San Francisco every year, and I've attended it now for the last 3 or 4 years. It's called SoCap, the Social Capital Markets. And there's really a huge continuum of things that can be described as socially responsible investing. Some people call it social capital. Some people call it impact investing. And it's everything from pretty much traditional philanthropy with a little bit of a business flavor to it, to really hardcore investing, but investing in things that have a return and are, again, hopefully a benefit to society. For example, one of our trustees has one of the largest green tech investment firms in the United States, and they're putting money into green technologies and green energy, alternative energy sources. So really, social capital has become a very big movement. There are some very interesting estimates about sort of the size of this movement and how large it is, that right now there are at least 50 billion in assets within impact investing bodies and mechanisms, and this is expected to continue to grow rapidly over the next 10 years to perhaps 500 billion available for investing in socially responsible mechanisms. And of course, AWF is looking at this and taking an interest in it, and so I now want to go sort of the third part of my discussion, which is putting these two things together, AWF's traditional involvement in conservation enterprise and the impact investing movement. And so AWF looked at this opportunity, and I think we saw several things. We had expertise in this area. We have seen that in addition to our traditional work with government parks agencies and with rural communities, there is a group of really very creative and very dedicated entrepreneurs and business people out there. And some of them have terrific business ideas and terrific existing businesses, in fact, business models that also contribute to the success of our mission. But it is difficult for them to access traditional finance for these businesses. If you go to a bank, a traditional bank, and say, look, I want an open ecotourism operation, and the bank says, fine, how are we going to secure this loan? And you say, well, do you own the land? And no, the land's inside a national park. Well, can we have title to your building? My building is canvas and wood. That's not going to work given the risk profile and the security strategies of a traditional financing mechanism body. And so we've looked at the impact investing movement. We've seen that there's a group of entrepreneurs and business people, and then we've seen the growth of opportunity, and we want to scale. The number of enterprises that we did in the last 15 years, they're great, but Africa is big, and there are a lot more communities that we want to touch, and we want to make sure we're not taking finance away from other very important things like saving the rhino to put into these businesses. So we put all these things together and did a lot of thinking, and there's some wonderfully dedicated people on our board. We did a lot of thinking. We did a lot of consultation. We had to get financial advice. We had to get legal advice. And as you can see, we founded a new subsidiary company. It's called African Wildlife Capital. It is an impact investing vehicle. Legally, African Wildlife Capital was established on the island of Mauritius, which is, of course, a member state of the African Union. And what I like to tell people is that Mauritius is sort of the Delaware of Africa. It is a jurisdiction that is convenient for registering a vehicle like this. Mauritius has double taxation treaties with many of the countries of sub-Saharan Africa, and it also has a quite good core of sort of professional services. So this is where African Wildlife Capital is based. And in a word, what African Wildlife Capital is doing is we are going out to social investors who are interested in our mission. We are getting them to commit capital to the sorts of businesses that we're interested in investing in. We then deploy that capital into businesses and are able to have the sort of impact that we're wanting to have. Now, let me say that African Wildlife Capital is not sort of a very vague or general green fund. People can't just come to us with any idea, oh, I want to recycle aluminum cans. This is a fund that is focused very, very specifically on wildlife populations and on particular pieces of wildlife habitat. And it's so interesting when I go to meetings like SOCAP and so forth, because again, the impact investing movement is large, but we are a very, very niche product. In fact, I find people are sort of constantly amazed that we've taken the concept of impact investing and been able to apply it in such a targeted way to this really quite specific niche of AWF's interest. Now, another really interesting thing about African Wildlife Capital and the way it's structured and the way it works is that we have what we call conservation covenants. And the way these conservation covenants work is that I'm sure many of you have been involved in financing, and a financing agreement will have financial covenants. If we loan you money, you will agree to pay it back at a certain interest rate over a certain amount of time. You will agree not to take on other debt without our permission. You will agree not to pay dividends out to your shareholders until you've retired our debt first. Those are financial undertakings. What we integrate into these agreements is a parallel set of conservation covenants about the way the borrower will behave, about the way their employees will behave, and in the case of agriculture, the way outproducers will behave related to the conservation targets we have in this area. And this has been an area of great innovation that we're very proud of. These conservation covenants integrated into the financing agreement along with the financial covenants. So let me just tell you again now how how African Wildlife Capital works and how it's structured. Under African Wildlife Capital, we are raising discrete rounds of funding. We call them conservation bonds. So far, this is the size we're dealing with in the $7 to $3 million range. We go out, once again, to impact investors who are interested in our mission, and they basically pledge to make capital available to us in units of $250,000. So that's to say some investors have come in at $250,000, some have come in at $500,000, some have come in at $1 million, depending on their appetite and the resources they have available. We then take that money. We have a pipeline of interesting conservation enterprise deals that have come to our attention. We interact with those entrepreneurs and business people. We negotiate a structure to the financing and a set of conservation covenants. African Wildlife Capital does have a board that looks very specifically at each the value proposition for each proposed investment. That money is then placed with these enterprises, and generally the span of the time the capital will be deployed is 7 to 10 years. That capital is then repaid to AWF, and we actually give our investors now a choice of between 0 and 3% as a return on their money. Some of the investors have told us, wow, if you just get the money back and give me the money back, that would be great. I'm happy with that. Other people would like to see at least a modest return on their investment, and so that's the sort of return that we try to bring. Now, the first conservation bond was launched in 2011, and it's a group of AWF's trustees who served as the first investors. We've deployed this money now into 5 investments, and you can see what some of them are here, and I'm going to give you a couple of case studies of some of the things that we've invested in. And we are looking to open up a conservation bond too, and currently seeking investment into that second conservation bond. But let me just take a couple minutes and show you some of the sorts of things, some of the sorts of businesses that we're investing in. Our very first investment is in southern Tanzania, a high rainfall part of southern Tanzania, very interesting. And the enterprise sector it's actually an avocado farm, a sustainable avocado farm. The history here is that this is a place where avocado has been grown for a long time, but actually a lot of the avocados just fall to the ground and rot. They're not suitable for transport over long distances because it's not the right variety of avocado, and the skins bruise easily. There is a type of avocado favored by the market called the Haas avocado, and this entrepreneur was able to find that the avocados in this part of Tanzania ripen perfectly for the season when there is a gap in Europe in the avocado market. And so an avocado farm has been established, and we're working with 3,500 farmers to grow avocados on their land. In some cases, we're able to cut off existing avocado trees and graft on the new Haas avocado, and this farmer can be a business within 2 seasons actually producing avocados on their land. And as always, there is a conservation logic to this project. The avocado farm is right next to a new national park called Kitulo National Park. It's also sometimes been called the Serengeti of flowers, as you can see in this lovely shot, because there are at least 45 varieties of orchids and 120 faunal species within this park. So the avocado business is stabilizing land use and protecting the borders of this national park and giving all those farmers higher income so that they don't have a reason to come into the park. And both the avocado farm itself and all the outgrowers have signed on to this package of conservation covenants as a way to help protect the park. Let me move to another example in Namibia. This is a place called Grootberg, named after the Grootberg Mountain. There is a community conservancy here, very important for wildlife. And on this conservancy is the first community-owned lodge. This is in sort of the Skeleton Coast, Etosha area, for those of you who know Namibia well. A lodge existed and was actually already receiving guests, but the facilities were not up to par. They did not have enough rooms. They did not have a big enough kitchen. There were certain things missing, and so the lodge required, again, additional capitalization to really meet its potential. And so, again, the community went to a bank, and the bank found out the bank was not willing to provide financing because for all the usual reasons, would this community actually pay it back? And it's not a traditional lender. So this group came to AWF. We were able to provide financing, and significant improvements have been made. All these repairs and expansions have been done. They're now completed because the tourism season in Namibia is the, what's the South African winter. It begins in June. And the income from this lodge, we think, may be as much as quadrupled as a result of the investments that we've been able to make here. Just want to mention one more point about this. Another thing African Wildlife Capital is doing is looking for very innovative ways to structure financing. The community was afraid that if there was a temporary dip in tourism, they wouldn't be able to make the interest payments. And so we structured this financing such that it has no interest. What it has is a royalty on their income until the financing fee is paid. So if tourism drops, their repayment to AWC drops, and when tourism picks up again, their payment picks up again. And this deal was so innovative that it had to go to the Central Bank of Namibia for approval, which did happen. And here's a great picture of the black rhino, which is one of the species being protected by this loan. And just the last deal that I want to talk to you about briefly, our most recently deal, is in the Ethiopian Highlands. You can see the diversity of these deals. This is a place where a new national park has been established way up in the mountains. I hope you can see on your screen the beautiful, beautiful landscape of the place we're talking about. This park, they call Ethiopia the roof of Africa. This is the Mountain Nyala, an iconic species that you can only see up here, and the Ethiopian wolf, one of the most highly endangered carnivores in Africa. And we have made a loan for a new ecotourism venture there. This park basically currently has no revenue. People have not traditionally gone there, and there's no place to stay. We made a decision in February to proceed with financing this lodge. I think our input into it is $800,000. Construction has begun. This is going to be the main lodge building, and you can just see the beautiful setting there. So this was the most recent enterprise that we've invested in. Now, just to sort of wrap up, I want to say that I think this has been a very rewarding and exciting development for me within AWF. Our work with African Wildlife Capital. This is a way where we can have a lot of impact, working with the private sector, creating more jobs, protecting a greater area, more hectares of land for conservation. It's really about two things to me: scale and sustainability. The fact that we can scale up our efforts using the sort of the engine of the private sector, and also that, you know, traditional aid projects, traditional grants, sometimes you give money and you come back 5 years later and maybe you can't even see that anything was done there. These are businesses that will hopefully succeed and be self-sustaining over many years and many generations. And we hope the sustainability of this way of working is going to be very high. So let me now address a couple of questions that you've submitted. One of the questions is, have you identified investments and borrowers for CB2? And the answer is, yes, we have a pipeline of deals that are under due diligence and under negotiation. So we have not committed to any of them yet, but we have a very extensive pipeline. And I must say I'm quite pleased about this, because what I've seen with other impact investing funds is sometimes they raise the money and they fail to place it because they don't have a pipeline of deals. So I'm excited to see that we have a very interesting pipeline of deals under due diligence. Another question, will any of the bonds be for less than 10 years? I don't think so. We have looked across the types of enterprises that we're investing in so far, and you know, there's a jargon around this, and one of the things people tell us is that some of these enterprises, they need a lot of runway to get up into the air. And so we think a lot of these enterprises will need 6 to 8 years to take this capital and turn it into a long-term business. Well, if it takes us a couple of years to place the capital, we sometimes then give them a short holiday when they're only making interest payments but not repaying principal. And so we think 10 years is probably the right thing to tell our investors is the amount of time it will take to get their money back. I'm just going to ask my colleague to step to the side a little bit. Thank you. I've been asked about using land to capture solar energy. That's another really good question. Our two key sectors at the moment, as I've said, are conservation tourism and agriculture. However, if we do add a sector, I expect it to be energy. I think there will be cases where there are proposals to start energy projects that also have a very strong conservation logic. Another question, what interest rates are charged to borrowers? We have it depends on the deal, but we have a sort of a target of 8%. That's sort of our target, rate of interest charged to borrowers. Right now, AWF is subsidizing the operational cost of African Wildlife Capital very appropriately because it's all in service to our mission. We do hope with that gap then between the 3% that we're paying our investors and the 8% that we're being paid by borrowers, we will eventually be able to make AWC itself completely self-financing. I'm just going to look, see if there's another question here or two that I can take. A tremendous question that someone's sent me a softball on. The question is, have you gotten any returns? I've put up here on the screen here a day of real pride for us, July last year, the first time that we actually had interest payments back from the enterprises and were able to make a payment to our investors. So you can see here samples of sort of the receipts of us actually sending interest payments back to our investors. And this is very rewarding because, again, let me sort of wrap up now where I started. This is challenging work. And some people were skeptical, saying, well, you guys can try, but, are you really going to be able to get these businesses to repay the capital? And I'm delighted to tell you, of course, we have been very conservative and very cautious, but right now all of our businesses are on schedule making repayments, and we have actually been able to make payments back to our investors. So thank you very much. As you can probably tell, I love talking about this work and African Wildlife Capital. I hope you're going to see us growing this part of our program and doing a lot more in the future. I want to thank you all again for your support of AWF and your giving and your moral support and participation. Before you sign off, there is a survey screen that will pop up. If you have any feedback you'd like to give me or the team about these webinars and how we can improve them, do let me know. And have a great day. Thanks a lot.